He was just a quiet mechanic, Sawyer Grant, his days measured in grease and grinding gears, a man navigating the jagged shards of his past in the fading Vermont town of Millstone. She was Delaney Rhodes, a woman of sculpted elegance, arriving in a midnight blue Rolls-Royce, guarding secrets that threatened to rewrite everything Sawyer thought he knew about betrayal, loss, and the bitter taste of injustice. Their fractured worlds, separated by a decade of unspoken grief and misunderstanding, were about to collide with the cataclysmic force of an explosion. The Fuse A school bus engulfed in hellfire on a treacherous winter night, and the terrified screams of two little girls he'd never met piercing the icy darkness like shards of glass. What unfolded next would challenge the very bedrock of belief in love's endurance, the astonishing power of unimaginable second chances, and the ferocious, untamed spirit of humanity rising against despair. This is a story that doesn't just heal, it electrifies, a testament to the hidden battles fought in quiet towns and the extraordinary courage found in ordinary hearts. This is the story of a struggling single dad, a hero forged in fire, who snatched twin girls from a blazing inferno. Their haunted mother, bearing a history more entangled than either could imagine, would soon arrive, her presence an unspoken plea that resonated far deeper than words. The snow fell in relentless sideways sheets, a biting blizzard that cowed even the plows into cautious beasts. Sawyer Grant's battered pickup truck, a skeleton on wheels, rattled over the frost-heaved asphalt as he completed his midnight delivery route for Miller's Auto Parts. It was the same unforgiving stretch he'd driven for 10 years, a corridor of skeletal trees clawing at the bruised obsidian sky, lined with unlit mailboxes like forgotten tombstones. He preferred it that way. Predictable, devoid of surprises, a stark reflection of the solitary life he'd carved out after. He never allowed himself to finish that thought, the memories too sharp, too potent. Tonight, however, predictability shattered. Just before the treacherous bend near the abandoned Birch Hollow Church, a place local legend whispered was haunted by the Whistler of Birch Hollow. A mournful, sighing wind, carrying ancient sorrows and lost secrets from the shadowed depths of nearby Blackwood Reach. Sawyer saw it. A malevolent orange glow pulsed against the bruised black canvas of the night. At first, a detached corner of his brain registered house fire. Then he rounded the curve, and the full sickening horror slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. A yellow school bus canted at a grotesque angle, its front end half submerged in the icy maw of the frozen creek below. Smoke, thick and black, billowed from its shattered windows, quickly giving way to hungry, cruel flames. His tires shrieked in protest as he slammed on the brakes, the ancient truck fishtailing wildly before skidding to a halt mere inches from the ditch. He was out before it stopped, rocking his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, the frigid air burning his lungs. He didn't think. He couldn't. Years of buried training, skills honed in a life he'd left behind, buried under layers of grief, numbing routine, and Millstone's silent judgment, roared back to life as if it had never slept. He sprinted towards the inferno, the snow crunching desperately under his worn boots. The front of the bus was a mangled accordion crushed against a twisted guardrail, the rear already a raging pyre. Flames clawed skyward with a demonic guttural roar. The air, thick and choking, reeked of burning diesel, melting plastic, and something else. The metallic, unmistakable tang of pure terror. Asher used to talk about the Blackwood Reach. A fleeting, irrelevant thought crossed his mind. Said it swallowed secrets whole. He pushed it away. "Hello, anyone inside?" He bellowed, his voice raspy against the violent crackle and pop of the fire. A tiny choked whimper. Then another, a high-pitched cry of undiluted fear that sliced through the cacophony. Sawyer didn't hesitate. Adrenaline, potent and sharp, surged through him. He found the emergency door buckled and hopelessly jammed. With a guttural roar, born of desperation, he smashed through the window of the door with his elbow gritting his teeth against the searing heat that kissed his skin and the acrid smoke that seared his lungs. Inside it was a vision from Dante's Inferno. Seats were twisted into grotesque skeletal shapes. Windows had blown out spewing shards of glass and molten foam like nightmarish confetti. He found them two small figures huddled between bench seats, almost invisible in the swirling, suffocating smoke. Twin girls no older than 7 or 8. One clutched a scorched teddy bear so tightly her knuckles were bone-white, stark terror etched in her wide eyes. The other had a nasty bleeding gash on her forehead, blood and soot mingling in a terrifying crimson mask. Their eyes, enormous and dark, were pits of pure horror. "We're gonna get out," he said, his voice a firm, unwavering anchor in the maelstrom. "You hear me. You're safe now." They didn't speak, just stared, petrified statues amidst the chaos. He scooped one under each arm, they were terrifyingly, impossibly light, and backed out, shielding them with his body as best he could. Just as his boots hit the icy, treacherous ground, a deafening whoosh signaled a flashover. A torrent of white-hot flame shot through the center aisle of the bus, instantly consuming what little remained of the interior. The fire roared behind him, a living, breathing monster. He ran slipping and scrambling on the ice-slicked asphalt, their small bodies clutched tightly to his chest. They made it to the road's edge, collapsing onto the cold, unforgiving snow. He laid the girls gently down, stripping off his own thick flannel jacket to cover their violently shivering forms. One began to sob, ragged, broken sounds that tore at something deep inside him. The other whispered, her voice barely audible, "Is my sister okay? She's breathing." Sawyer said gently, brushing ash from her matted hair, his own hands raw and stinging, "She's gonna be okay. You both are." Sirens, a mournful wail, at first grew rapidly louder, slicing through the skeletal trees like avenging angels. Red and blue lights strobed, painting the nightmarish scene in grotesque dancing colors. When the paramedics arrived, a blur of urgent practice deficiency, Sawyer backed away, melting into the deeper shadows by the tree line. He watched silently as they loaded the girls, now whimpering, but conscious, into the ambulance. His hands were blistered, his forearm was bleeding from a deep gash where flying glass had torn through his sleeve, but he felt no pain. Not yet. "Sir, are you the driver?" A sheriff's deputy, a young man with wide, shocked eyes, asked, approaching him. Sawyer shook his head. "No, He couldn't finish the sentence. "You saved their lives," the deputy said, awe and profound disbelief warring in his voice. "You ran into that." Sawyer didn't answer. He simply turned, walked back to his truck, the engine sputtering to life like a reluctant heart, and drove home into the silent, judging night. His small trailer was cold, the kind of insidious chill that seeped deep into your bones, a constant, unwelcome reminder of how little insulation he had, both literal and otherwise. He peeled off the burnt, reeking flannel shirt, the smell of smoke clinging to him like a shroud, ran cool water over his raw, stinging hands, and stared at his reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Smoke had left ghostly pale streaks on his soot-stained cheeks. His eyes, haunted and deeply shadowed, looked far older than his 40 years. He tried to sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, flames screaming the indelible smell of burning innocence. He didn't tell anyone. Not his laconic boss, old Mr. Henderson at the garage. Not his sharp-tongued yet secretly kind-hearted neighbor June. He didn't want to be on the news, didn't crave a medal or a meaningless handshake from the mayor. He hadn't done it for glory. He didn't even know precisely why he'd done it beyond the primal, unthinking urge to silence those small, terrified cries. Only that he couldn't not. But Millstone, like most small towns, always found out. By sunrise, someone, a passing motorist who'd arrived just after the rescue, had posted a shaky cell phone video. Him, a shadowed, indistinct figure running from the fully engulfed bus, two small, precious bundles clutched in his arms. By lunchtime, it had gone viral. The local paper, the Millstone Gazette, screamed, "Unknown hero rescues twin girls from burning bus nightmare." Still, Sawyer said nothing. He ignored the insistent, increasingly frequent knocks on his flimsy trailer door, let the phone ring until it gave up its shrill lament. He fed his old arthritic dog Buster, fixed a stubbornly leaking pipe under the sink with methodical grounding precision, and did what he'd done for the last 10 years. Kept moving, kept his head down, kept the past locked away. Until the next morning. The world was hushed, blanketed in a fresh, pristine layer of snow as he stepped out to shovel his narrow front steps. That's when he saw it. A car. No, not just any car. A Rolls-Royce. Silver, sleek, opulent, and so wildly, surreally out of place, idling in front of his sagging porch, it was almost comical, its exhaust swirling like a ghostly, expensive breath in the crisp air. The back door opened slowly, with an almost silent, precision-engineered click. A woman stepped out. She wore an impeccably tailored navy wool coat that spoke of quiet wealth. Her gloved hands clasped her dark hair, pinned in a clean, graceful twist that suggested guarded sorrow and resilient strength. Her eyes, though etched with fatigue, burned with an intensity he couldn't immediately name. "Mr. Grant," she asked, her voice low, melodious, but unmistakably strained. He nodded mute, his shovel still clutched in his hand like a rustic scepter. "I believe you saved my daughters." Sawyer's mouth opened, then closed. No sound emerged. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She stepped closer, her expensive leather heels crunching delicately on the freshly shoveled path. Her voice softened, almost a whisper. "They told me you had kind eyes," she said. "They were right." Sawyer looked at her then. Really looked. And though the years had etched new lines of worry and grief around those familiar, intelligent gray eyes, though sorrow had stolen some of her youthful, untamed radiance. He knew her name before she even said it. He felt a jolt, violent and profound, like touching a live wire buried deep in the frozen earth of his past. Delaney, his brother's wife, Asher's widow. For a long suspended moment, neither of them moved. Snow drifted gently between them, momentarily softening the hard lines of the winter morning, but doing absolutely nothing to thaw the sudden crackling tension that vibrated in the air. The world had gone utterly silent, as if even the biting wind was holding its breath, suddenly privy to a reckoning 10 long years in the making. Sawyer blinked, the crushing weight of recognition crashing through him like a rogue wave, sweeping away a decade of carefully constructed, fiercely guarded defenses. "Delaney," he said at last, his voice rough from disuse, from smoke, and from something deeper, something painfully exhumed from the locked, dusty attic of his memory. She gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "It's been a long time, Sawyer." 10 years, he corrected the number, a lead weight in his gut. "Feels like more. Long enough for old wounds to scab over, not nearly long enough for them to truly disappear." He cleared his throat, feeling the sharp sting of the cold air against his still raw, bandaged hands. What are you doing here?" Delaney looked down at the pristine snow for a beat, before raising her eyes again. They were the same soft, compelling gray, he remembered, but heavier now, shadowed, as if they'd weathered too many invisible storms. "I came to thank you," she said simply, "and—" Her voice faltered, a flicker of vulnerability, briefly disturbing her composed facade to look you in the eye. "You don't owe me anything." His tone was flat, guarded, the old walls reasserting themselves. "I disagree vehemently." Her voice wasn't sharp, but careful, deliberate, as if she were trying not to spill something fragile, something volatile and explosive between them. She stepped forward, reached into her coat pocket, and pulled out a folded newspaper already creased and worn at the edges from handling. He didn't have to read the headline. He'd seen the damn photo. His own silhouette starkly backlit by roaring fire carrying her daughters like lifelines. "They're okay?" he asked, finally the question tearing from him raw and urgent, bypassing all defenses. Delaney nodded, a flicker of profound, almost unbearable relief in her eyes. A few bruises, smoke inhalation. Maisie needed a few stitches for that cut on her forehead. But the doctors say she'll be just fine. They both keep talking about the man who smelled like engine grease and honey buns. She offered a ghost of a smile, the first fragile crack in her composure. Sawyer felt something dangerously loosen in his chest. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath, not just for a day, but for an entire decade. He remembered Asher once in a rare moment of candor, mentioning hiding things, important things, where no one would think to look, not even in the whispers of Blackwood Reach. Another forgotten fragment. "Can I?" Delaney gestured vaguely toward his humble porch. Sawyer hesitated. The last time she had stood on that porch, it had been a sweltering, oppressive summer day. She was holding his brother Asher's hand, her dark hair wild from laughter, her eyes full of a bright, shining future. He knew even then, with a sickening certainty, was built on treacherous lies. Now everything was different, shadowed, irrevocably broken. Still, he stepped aside. "Come in." The trailer was modest, obsessively functional, clean to the point of austerity, but undeniably worn. The faint, lingering scent of old wood, strong, cheap coffee, and Buster, his aging, loyal mutt, hung in the air. A patched-up couch, a rickety bookshelf crammed with second-hand novels, a small, ancient space heater humming valiantly against the persistent, insidious cold. Sawyer poured 2 mugs of coffee, the strong, bitter kind he favored, and slid one across the scarred Formica table. Delaney sat carefully, her gloved hands folded around the warm ceramic, her expensive coat looking utterly alien in the humble Spartan surroundings. She looked around, not judging, he thought, just observing. Recording. Absorbing. "It's quiet here," she finally said, her voice soft. "That's the point," he replied, his voice still gravelly. Silence stretched again between them, not entirely uncomfortable, but thick with unasked questions, with the hovering ghosts of shared history and profound, painful misunderstandings. Finally, Delaney spoke, her voice, low, measured. "I didn't know you were still here." "In Millstone." "Didn't plan to stay," he admitted, his gaze fixed on her ostentatious car, a silver beast against the snow. "But after Asher, after everything, I didn't really know where else to go, or who'd have me." Her fingers tightened slightly on the mug. At the mention of her late husband, Sawyer's younger, charismatic, fatally flawed brother, the small room seemed to shrink, the air growing palpably colder. Delaney took a measured breath, steeling herself. "I suppose I should say something about him. About what you tried so desperately to tell me." "You don't have to." The words were clipped. "I want to." She met his gaze directly then, and he saw a flicker of the fierce, unyielding steel that had once captivated his brother, and if he were honest, had intrigued him too. "Sawyer, I didn't believe you. Back then, when you came to me, desperate, anguished, trying to tell me what was happening in his unit, what he was doing, I thought you were jealous, bitter, consumed by resentment. I thought you were trying to break us apart, to maliciously destroy the only good thing he had, the only thing I believed was real." Sawyer didn't flinch, but something shifted deep in his eyes. An old familiar pain long since cauterized by time and solitude, but never fully truly healed. "You were grieving." He was your husband. He was your brother. She countered softly, but with an undeniable cutting edge. Sawyer looked away, the muscle in his jaw working silently. Delaney continued, her voice lower, now raw, with a decade of unspoken corrosive regret. But I've had time, Sawyer. So many years of it. Years of quiet, echoing nights and hollow, meaningless victories to see things for what they truly were. He was charming, yes. Magnetic. Brave in his own reckless, destructive way. But he was broken. Deeply, irrevocably broken. And what he did? What you tried so valiantly to stop. It cost far more than I ever allowed myself to admit. To me, to the girls, and especially to you. It cost you everything. Sawyer said nothing, staring at the fresh snow beginning to gather on the gleaming windshield of her luxury car, a stark, undeniable symbol of the vast chasm between their worlds. When I saw your face in that video, she said, her voice trembling slightly now, betraying the emotion she fought to control, when I realized it was you who saved my daughters. Of all people in the world. It was like someone punched the air out of my lungs. A ghost from a past I thought I'd buried. You didn't hesitate. You just acted. They're kids. He said, his voice low, almost a growl, the protective instinct still thrumming. Doesn't matter whose they are. It matters profoundly to me. Her voice firmed, regained its resolve. She reached into her coat again, pulling out a worn photograph creased and soft at the corners from countless viewings. Willa and Maisie, a few years younger, smiling bright, gap-toothed grins in their school uniforms, a fierce, stubborn light in their eyes that reminded him painfully of his own childhood summers of unspoken vows and sacred brotherly bonds forged long before the world tainted them. I don't know what I came here truly hoping for, she confessed, her gaze fixed on the precious photo. Maybe just absolution, forgiveness, or perhaps impossibly a beginning. Sawyer looked at the photo, at their innocent, unknowing faces. They had Delaney's intelligent eyes, Asher's undeniably captivating smile, but that fierce, resilient light. That was all their own. He let out a long, shuddering breath. They're beautiful, Delaney. She smiled then, a genuine, weary, soul-deep smile that momentarily, miraculously bridged the chasm of agonizing years and shared pain between them. You always were the better man, Sawyer, she said. Not as empty flattery, but as a quiet, devastating truth that had taken her far, far too long to see and accept. He shook his head, a harsh, dismissive gesture. Not better. Just still here. Still standing after everything. Outside, the wind had picked up again, brushing snowflakes against the flimsy trailer windows like spectral sighing whispers. The old Birch Hollow legend of the Whistler came unbidden to his mind. Was it just the wind, or something more? A mournful lament for all that was lost and broken in their small, tight-lipped, unforgiving town. And the Blackwood Reach, he thought, where Asher had hinted secrets, lay buried deep. Delaney finished her barely touched coffee, and walked to the door. She turned, her expression hesitant, vulnerable, stripped of its earlier defenses. They've been asking about you. Constantly. Willow wants to know if the man with the fire hands will come visit. Sawyer raised a skeptical eyebrow, the term jarring him. Fire hands? She thinks you're some kind of superhero. A ghost of a smile played on Delaney's lips. He almost smiled back. Almost. The impulse was there, rusty and unfamiliar. Delaney stepped closer, her voice gentle yet resolute, like a silken cord being pulled taut. You don't have to say yes. There's no obligation. But if you want, if there's any part of you that can, come see them. Tomorrow. Or the next day. No pressure, just come. He didn't answer right away, the silence stretching pregnant with unspoken words. As she turned to leave, he said softly, so softly she almost missed it, "I'll think about it." She paused on the snow-dusted steps, looking back over her shoulder, her expression unreadable in the flat gray morning light. "I hope you do, Sawyer. More than you know." Then she walked through the deepening snow, her expensive coat billowing around her like a dark, troubled sail, and disappeared into the silent, opulent gleam of the waiting Rolls-Royce, leaving Sawyer alone with the agitated ghosts of his past and the terrifying, fragile, utterly unexpected possibility of a future. The next morning, Sawyer sat on the edge of his worn-out recliner, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug that had lost its handle years ago. Buster lay at his feet, sighing contentedly in his sleep. The trailer was preternaturally quiet, except for the incessant, maddening ticking of the old clock above the stove and the occasional metallic crackle from the ancient space heater, waging its perpetually losing battle against the pervasive Vermont chill. Sleep had been a fleeting, tormented thing populated by flickering images. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Delaney. Not the radiant, carefree girl from his fractured memories, the young woman with the wind in her dark hair and easy, infectious laughter in her voice. But the woman she was now. Composed, yes. Guarded, undeniably. Grateful, certainly. But haunted. Deeply, irrevocably haunted. And when he thought of the girls Willa and Maisie, their small, terrified faces illuminated by the hellish firelight, his heart twisted in a way he hadn't allowed it to in a full, barren decade. He hadn't been around children since Asher. That part of his life felt like another country, one he'd visited briefly, tragically, and then been exiled from, never daring to attempt a return. Until now. By mid-morning, an irresistible, inexplicable pull had him back in his battered truck fingers, drumming restlessly on the cracked steering wheel. He had no specific destination in mind, telling himself he was just clearing his head, letting the monotonous, familiar rumble of the tires soothe the roiling turmoil within. But he found himself almost unconsciously passing Millstone Elementary School. He slowed his eyes, scanning the snow-covered playground, where two tiny figures in bright pink and purple puffy coats were attempting to build a lopsided, cheerfully deformed snowman under the watchful, bundled-up eye of a teacher. He couldn't be absolutely sure it was them from this distance, but the sight brought an unexpected, sharp warmth, an almost painful ache of longing that left him momentarily breathless. He drove on, the image seared indelibly into his mind. That night, June McAllister, his neighbor from 2 trailers down, showed up at his door with a steaming casserole dish and a look that clearly meant business. She was a widow in her early 70s, with a long silver braid coiled regally on her head and a tongue sharp enough to strip paint from a battleship, softened only by the deep, abiding kindness that radiated from her shrewd, observant eyes. She'd been mothering Sawyer in small, unobtrusive, vital ways ever since he'd slunk back into Millstone years ago, a broken, silent man. "I saw that fancy chariot parked out front yesterday," she announced without preamble, handing him the warm dish and marching into his trailer like she owned the place. Not every day a Rolls-Royce graces our humble, frost-bitten abode, Sawyer Grant. A rare, fleeting smirk touched Sawyer's lips. "She was just saying thank you, June." "Is that what they're calling it these days?" June raised a knowing, skeptical eyebrow, expertly popping the lid off the casserole. "This here is turkey tetrazzini with extra cheese and a hefty dose of good intentions. You look like you're in desperate need of all 3. Sawyer leaned heavily against the worn counter. "She's Asher's widow, June. Delaney Rhodes." June's hand poised to serve stilled. Her usually sharp, bird-like features softened with a mixture of profound surprise and something akin to deep, sorrowful pity. "Delaney Rhodes. Well, I'll be. She was the one, wasn't she? The one everyone used to whisper about after Asher. Said she vanished into thin air, rich as Croesus, after his unpleasantness was ruled an accident. She trailed off delicately, her usual bluntness tempered by the gravity of the past. Some even muttered about Blackwood Reach, how it swallowed up truths just as easily as it did light. She didn't disappear. June Sawyer said the words emerging before he could censor them, a surprising protectiveness surfacing. She just stopped performing for people who never really cared about her or him in the first place. June looked at him sharply, her gaze piercing, missing nothing. That sounds mighty personal, Sawyer, and a tad defensive if you ask me. He sighed, dragging a weary hand down his tired face. We used to be close, a very long time ago. Before everything. Before he stopped, the words lodging in his throat like jagged shards of ice. You tried to do the right thing, June said gently, her voice losing its usual gruff, no-nonsense edge. I remember. Everyone around here remembers, even if they pretend they don't. You reported him, your own flesh and blood brother. Most folks in Millstone didn't want to believe you. Called you a troublemaker, jealous, a black sheep trying to drag down the golden boy. Delaney didn't believe me. Sawyer said the old familiar bitterness, a dull, persistent ache in his chest. She thought I was trying to ruin him, to tear her pretty perfect fairy tale apart with my lies. And was she entirely wrong to protect the man she loved, the father of her future children? June asked, not unkindly, he always pragmatic. No, he conceded, his voice barely a whisper. She was right, to want to protect him, to believe in him. I probably would have done the same. But it still broke something vital. In me. In us. June came over and laid a surprisingly gentle, gnarled hand on his arm. Not everything that's broken is lost for good, Sawyer. Sometimes, son, the cracks are what let the light in, eventually. He didn't answer, but he held on to her words, a fragile, unexpected lifeline, long after she'd bustled out, leaving the comforting aroma of her casserole and a sliver of hope in her wake. 2 agonizing, indecisive days crawled by before he found himself driving towards the Rhodes estate on the affluent, old-moneyed edge of town. He hadn't consciously decided to go. Not really. But an undeniable, quiet, insistent pull, like an invisible current he couldn't fight, had grown stronger with each passing hour, drawing him inexorably in. The house was nothing like his ramshackle trailer. Grand, imposing, white-columned, wrapped in wide, welcoming porches, and crowned with intricate, almost Gothic window trim. Yet it wasn't cold or sterile. 2 bright pink bicycles lay discarded on the sprawling, snow-dusted lawn. Vibrant chalk drawings adorned a section of the heated driveway. And someone, Delaney he presumed, had hung a cheerful, defiant string of twinkling snowflake lights along the eaves, a splash of unexpected warmth against the imposing aristocratic facade. He stood at the imposing wrought-iron gate for a long, uncertain moment, his heart hammering against his ribs, doubt a cold, heavy knot in his stomach. He was about to turn back when the heavy, ornately carved oak door creaked open. Willa burst out first, a flash of purple coat and uncontainable bubbling energy, her arms waving frantically. He's here, Mama, he's here. The fire hands man is here. Maisie followed slower, more shy, clutching a small, obviously handmade card in her mittened hand. But her eyes were just as bright, shining with an innocent, uncomplicated adoration that pricked painfully at Sawyer's carefully guarded, battle-scarred heart. Delaney stepped onto the wide porch behind them, a soft cashmere scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, her face flushed perhaps from the biting wind, perhaps from something else entirely. She didn't say anything at first, just waited, her gaze steady, expectant, a silent question in her eyes. Sawyer pushed open the heavy gate. The girls, squealing with unadulterated delight, ran up and with surprising boldness grabbed him by his calloused, still-bandaged hands. Mama said we could show you our room, and Goldie, our amazing goldfish, and our spectacular snow globe collection from all over the world. He looked at Delaney over their heads, a silent question in his own eyes. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a hint of a genuine smile softening the tired lines around her lips. They've been asking about you every single day since the hospital. I think they were about to organize a search party armed with teddy bears and cookies. Before they could enter, another figure appeared in the doorway. An older woman impeccably dressed with an air of formidable authority and eyes that matched Delaney's in color, but were distinctly cooler. Margaret Rhodes, Delaney's mother. Her gaze on Sawyer was assessing sharp. "So," she said, her voice clipped and resonant with old money. "This is Millstone's celebrated hero. My daughter, Mr. Grant, has demonstrated an unfortunate penchant for misjudging male character in the past. I trust this current association will not prove to be another regrettable addition to that history." Delaney flushed slightly. "Mother, please." Sawyer met Margaret's gaze steadily. "Ma'am, I'm just here because your granddaughters invited me." Inside the house smelled of cinnamon pine and the subtle, unmistakable scent of old money. A fire crackled merrily in a massive fieldstone hearth. The girls, chattering like excited sparrows, pulled him through rooms filled with laughter, light-scattered crayons, half-finished puzzles, and an air of lived-in warmth that surprised him. He let them lead. He even let himself smile, a rusty, unfamiliar, yet not entirely unpleasant sensation. Later, while the girls were mesmerized by an animated movie curled up like kittens on a plush, cream-colored rug, Delaney poured them both strong Earl Grey tea and joined him at the expansive, scrubbed pine kitchen table, which was clearly the comfortable, well-used heart of the home. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her delicate china cup. "Neither was I," Sawyer replied, the admission costing him more than he'd expected. She looked down at her cup, tracing the rim with a slender finger. "They talk about you like you're a hero, Sawyer. Like you walked on water or perhaps through fire unscathed. I'm not a hero, Delaney." The denial was automatic, deeply ingrained, a shield he'd carried for years. "They think you are." She paused, then met his eyes, her own shimmering with an emotion he couldn't quite decipher. Gratitude, certainly, but something else, something more vulnerable. "And for what it's worth, so do I." Sawyer exhaled a slow, deliberate release of tension from his tightly wound shoulders. "I didn't do it to prove anything. Not to you, not to anyone." "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "That's precisely what makes it mean so much more." They sat in a comfortable, fragile silence for a while, a delicate, unspoken truce settling between them. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and slow, each flake a tiny, fleeting benediction. Sawyer watched them drift past the large, mullioned bay window. Finally, Delaney broke the quiet, her voice laced with a vulnerability that disarmed him completely. "I need to ask you something, Sawyer. Something I've needed to ask for a very long time." He turned to her, bracing himself for the inevitable pain. "Do you still hate him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't an accusation. It was a plea, a deep-seated fear, a desperate, fragile hope. Sawyer thought for a long, heavy moment, the ghosts of his turbulent past swirling around him, like the snow outside. Asher, his charming, charismatic, reckless, ultimately destructive younger brother. "No," he said at last, the single word heavy, with a universe of unspoken complexities. "But I don't forgive him either. Not yet. Maybe. Maybe never." She nodded, her eyes glassy, but her gaze remarkably steady. "Me neither," she confessed, her voice catching, and in that shared, raw, painful admission, something deep and frozen between them, something 10 years encased in ice, began to tentatively, almost imperceptibly thaw. like the first subtle, courageous crack in a winter-locked river. A week later, an unexpected, vicious storm, even for millstones' notoriously unpredictable winters, slammed into town with savage fury. Freezing rain turned to sleet, then to heavy, blinding snow, driven by gale-force winds. Power lines snapped like brittle twigs, ancient trees groaned and cracked under the immense weight, and the entire town hunkered down, isolated and besieged. Sawyer was checking on June, whose small trailer felt particularly vulnerable, when her crackling battery-operated radio squawked an urgent weather alert. A section of the old, notoriously unstable ridge road near the Rhodes estate was prone to sudden, violent mudslides in extreme weather conditions. Delaney and the girls were up there, alone. The rational part of his brain told him they were probably fine, that Delaney was capable, resourceful. But a deeper, more primal, instinctual alarm bell was clanging insistently. He tried her cell phone. No service. The landline, June reported after a frustrating attempt, was dead too. That whole damned part of the mountain always gets cut off first in a blow like this, June said, her brow furrowed with genuine worry, her usual sharp wit absent. And that old house? Grand as it is, it's as isolated as a lighthouse on a rock. He didn't think. He just acted. Again. It was becoming a pattern. Buster whined anxiously at the door as he grabbed his heaviest insulated coat and a powerful military-grade flashlight. His truck, reliable despite its age and battered appearance, fought its way through the rapidly accumulating treacherous drifts. The wind howled like a tormented banshee, the whistler of Birch Hollow, in full malevolent shrieking cry. The road to the estate was a nightmare visibility near zero. Just as he neared the final steep ascent, wrestling the wheel against the buffeting wind, he saw it through the swirling snow. A set of fresh, deep tire tracks, stark against the white, veering sharply off the main drive, heading towards a little-used, overgrown service path that skirted the dangerously unstable cliff edge, a path that led perilously close to the shadowed reputation of Blackwood Reach. And they weren't the elegant, discreet tracks of Delaney's Rolls-Royce. These were from a heavy-duty vehicle, an SUV, or a large truck. A cold, sharp, metallic dread, colder than the wind, pierced through him. He found Delaney's car parked erratically, almost haphazardly near the house, one passenger door slightly ajar, a child's bright pink mitten lying forlornly discarded in the rapidly deepening snow beside it. The house itself was dark, ominously, unnaturally dark. He killed his engine, the sudden profound silence amplifying the ferocious roar of the storm. Then he heard it, a muffled shout abruptly cut short. And then, unmistakably, a child's cry, thin and terrified, nearly swallowed by the wind. Drawing on reserves of strength and adrenaline he didn't know he possessed, Sawyer moved like a wraith through the blinding, stinging snow towards the back of the sprawling house. A window on the ground floor overlooking the woods was broken, jagged shards of glass littering the snow beneath. He peered in, his heart pounding. The scene that met his eyes sent a shockwave of incandescent fury and ice-cold, paralyzing fear through him. Delaney was struggling fiercely with a large, thuggish-looking man in dark clothing, while another, equally rough-looking character was systematically ransacking a tall bookshelf, pulling books out and tossing them carelessly aside. And cowering behind a large, overturned armchair, their small faces pale with sheer terror, were Willa and Maisie. "Where is it, Mrs. Rhodes?" and the first man snarled, shaking Delaney roughly, his voice a brutal rasp. Asher wasn't exactly subtle. He liked to keep his insurance policy close at hand. "And my boss, he's real tired of waiting." Delaney cried out a sound of pain and defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing here." This was the new climax, more visceral, more terrifyingly immediate than the bus fire. This was deeply, chillingly personal. These men weren't random intruders. This was Asher's poisoned, malignant legacy reaching out with greedy, violent hands from beyond the grave. Sawyer didn't hesitate. He kicked in the already compromised back door with a savage roar, a primal, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated protective rage. The man holding Delaney whirled brute surprise flashing in his small, mean eyes, quickly replaced by cold, calculated malice. Well, what have we here? Unexpected company, or just another one of Asher's loose ends? The fight was brutal, desperate, illuminated by the stark, irregular flashes of lightning outside. Sawyer, fueled by a potent cocktail of adrenaline and a fierce, almost paternalistic need to protect, moved with a speed and ferocity that utterly belied his usually quiet, laconic demeanor. The first man, bulky but slow, went down hard after a precisely aimed, vicious blow to the jaw sent him crashing into a heavy sideboard. The second, wirier, and now brandishing a heavy steel crowbar he'd been using on the bookshelves, was more dangerous. He lunged, and Sawyer felt a searing, white-hot pain as the cold metal grazed his arm, tearing through his coat and shirt. But the momentary distraction allowed Delaney, quick-witted, even in terror, to shove a heavy antique brass lamp into the man's path, sending him sprawling awkwardly. As he scrambled to get up, cursing, Sawyer tackled him, the impact rattling the very foundations of the old historic house. They crashed heavily into Asher's ornate locked mahogany desk, the one Delaney had said Asher always kept locked. The sheer force of the impact, combined with the assailant's flailing, sprung a cleverly hidden, previously unknown compartment in the desk's side. A slim, worn, leather-bound ledger skittered out across the polished floor, along with a sheaf of faded, candid photographs. The wiry man, momentarily stunned, but recovering quickly, saw the ledger. His eyes widened with avaricious glee. That's it. That's what Thorne wants. The payday, he gasped, lunging desperately for it. But just then, a new figure appeared, silhouetted in the shattered doorway framed by the storm. Older, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit that seemed out of place in the chaos, with eyes like chips of glacial ice and an air of cold, reptilian authority. Marcus Thorne. A name Sawyer knew all too well. A corrupt, ruthless former police captain from Asher's old precinct in Burlington, a man Sawyer had also reported years ago, whose career had been significantly damaged, but not entirely destroyed, by the ensuing scandal. He'd always suspected with a certainty that chilled his blood that Thorne was the real insidious puppet master behind Asher's escalating illegal activities. Well, Sawyer Grant Thorne set his voice a low, venomous, sibilant hiss that sent shivers down Sawyer's spine. A small, wicked-looking semi-automatic pistol appeared as if by magic in his gloved hand. Fancy meeting you here of all places. Cleaning up another one of Asher's innumerable messes, are we? Or perhaps, trying to claim his little prize for yourself, he always said you were a jealous, backstabbing snake. Thorne's lips twisted into a cruel smirk. He also said you had a soft spot for damsels in distress. Looks like he was right on that count, at least. Before Sawyer could reply, a second henchman previously unnoticed emerged from the shadows of the hallway, blocking any easy escape, effectively trapping them. The storm raged outside, and for a moment it seemed as if the very house might be torn apart by the wind, or worse, give way to the threatening sounds of shifting earth from the ridge above. This isn't about Asher's prize, Thorne, Sawyer said slowly, carefully getting to his feet, deliberately placing himself between Thorne and Delaney and the terrified girls. This is about you terrorizing a family. About your greed. Family. Thorne laughed, a dry, rasping, utterly mirthless sound. Asher never truly cared about family, Grant, only what they could provide him. Protection, an alibi, a veneer of respectability. He was my best earner, a golden goose, until you stuck your sanctimonious holier-than-thou nose in where it didn't belong. You cost me millions, Grant. Millions, and more importantly, you cost Asher his life, making him panic, forcing him to run his damn mouth when the heat got too high because you wouldn't leave him alone. He gestured sharply with the gun. Now the ledger. And then perhaps, if you're all very cooperative, I'll consider letting this charming little family live to see another bleak millstone sunrise. The air crackled with unbearable tension. Willa let out a small, choked sob. Sawyer's mind raced, processing the new threat, the landslide, the extra man. Thorne's vendetta wasn't just about money. It was deeply, dangerously personal against him. He had to protect Delaney, the girls find a way out. You think Asher just gave up what he owed me? Thorne continued, his voice dripping contempt. He tried to make a deal, the coward. Offered me this ledger in exchange for a clean slate. Said he wanted to go straight for his family. He spat the word. Said you were pressuring him. I told him some debts can only be paid one way. This revelation hung in the air. Asher, trying to break free, caught in Thorne's web. Suddenly, Delaney, her eyes blazing with a newfound, incandescent fury, spoke, her voice, surprisingly, steady, strong. You won't get away with this, Thorne. Sawyer reported you and your corruption once, and by God, he'll do it again. Thorne sneered. Oh, I'm counting on it. Last time it was his unsupported word against a decorated police officer and his charming Teflon-coated golden boy brother. This time, he gestured with the gun towards the chaos, the fear. This time, I'll have a much more persuasive narrative. And no inconvenient witnesses. Especially not nosy ones who know about Blackwood Reach and what your dear Asher might have buried there. A low growl emanated from the hallway. Buster, who had somehow slipped in unnoticed during the chaos of the storm and the break-in, possibly through a door left ajar by the fleeing first henchman, let out a ferocious protective bark and launched himself a furry 70-pound projectile of loyalty at Thorne's legs. The unexpected valiant attack made Thorne stumble, his balance compromised. His shot went wild, shattering a porcelain shepherdess on the mantelpiece. In that split second of confusion and opportunity, Sawyer moved. He disarmed Thorne with a swift, brutally efficient practiced move learned long ago, the gun clattering harmlessly to the polished wooden floor. The fight with Thorne was short, brutal, and ended with Thorne groaning on the floor next to his accomplice, Sawyer's knee planted firmly in his back. The other henchman, seeing his boss go down, made a desperate lunge for Delaney. But Delaney, no longer a passive victim, swung the heavy brass lamp base with surprising force, connecting solidly with his head. He crumpled. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, their mournful sound, a beacon of hope slicing through the storm's fury. June, resourceful, indomitable. June must have somehow found a way to bypass the downed lines and call for help. Just then, a chilling sound, the groan of tortured earth from outside. The ridge road was giving way, but the immediate danger inside was neutralized. The aftermath was a surreal blur of flashing police lights painting the snow-lashed landscape, paramedics checking Sawyer's bleeding arm and Delaney's bruised wrist, and Delaney clinging to him, her body trembling uncontrollably. But her eyes fixed on his with an emotion so profound, it left him breathless. The ledger and photographs recovered from where they'd skittered under a sofa were damning evidence not just against Thorne and his thugs, but detailing with chilling precision Asher's deep, protracted involvement in a myriad of illegal enterprises. More importantly, there were notations in Asher's own flamboyant, looping handwriting about Sawyer's repeated desperate attempts to warn him to pull him back from the abyss, to save him from himself. Concrete, irrefutable proof of what Sawyer had claimed all those years ago, what no one, not even Delaney, had been willing to believe. Justice served cold and agonizingly late, but served nonetheless. Later, much later, after the police had taken Thorne and his goons away, their faces grim in the flashing emergency lights, and the girls were finally asleep upstairs, sedated by exhaustion, lingering fear, and copious amounts of hot chocolate laced with whipped cream, Delaney sat at the kitchen table, the incriminating ledger open before her. Her face was a mask of profound grief, corrosive shame, and dawning, excruciatingly painful understanding. He wrote, He actually wrote that you tried to save him multiple times, she whispered, tears streaming unheeded down her pale face, tracing paths through the soot that still smudged her cheek. He knew you were right. And I called you a liar. A jealous, hateful liar. Sawyer gently, carefully took the ledger from her trembling hands. You loved him, Delaney. You wanted to believe the best in him. There's no shame in that, only pain. His voice was raw, ragged, with an unexpected, overwhelming empathy that stunned her into silence. One of the younger deputies, before leaving, approached Sawyer. That bus fire, one of Thorne's men started singing. Said Thorne wanted to put pressure on Mrs. Rhodes, thought she had access to Asher's hidden assets. The fire, it was meant to be a scare tactic near her property. Maybe involve her driver. But the bus they targeted was the wrong one on an unexpected school run. It got out of control. Thorne's a monster, sir. Pure evil. Sawyer just nodded, the information settling like another layer of ice in his gut. But also, strangely, a sense of terrible, complete closure. The proposal didn't happen in the dramatic aftermath of the storm or in the rain. But a few weeks later, under a crisp, clear, hopeful millstone sky by the old weathered-covered bridge over the rushing Blackwater Creek, a place where Sawyer sometimes went to think, to find a measure of peace. This time, it was Sawyer who initiated it, a quiet, profound decision that had settled in his soul. He knelt on the worn, historic wooden planks, holding out not a diamond ring, but a small, intricately carved wooden bluebird he'd whittled himself over many solitary evenings, its form smooth and perfect in his calloused palm. Delaney, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to suppress. We've both walked through hellfire in our own ways. Maybe it's time we walked towards something good. Something real. Together. I'm not Asher. I can't promise you a perfect fairy tale life. God knows I can't. But I can promise you all of mine, for whatever it's worth. Delaney's tearful, heartfelt yes was nearly lost in their embrace, a fusion of past sorrows and future hopes under the watchful eyes of the ancient Vermont hills. Their wedding was small, deeply intimate, held in June's unexpectedly blooming late spring back garden, surrounded by defiant roses and cheerful peonies. Willa and Maisie, as self-proclaimed junior flower officers, scattered mismatched petals with solemn, infectious joy. June, dabbing at her eyes with a lace-edged handkerchief, declared loudly to anyone who would listen, "That man's got more layers than a prize-winning winter onion, and most of 'em are enough to make you cry for a week, but there's a profound sweetness at the core, mark my words. You found it, child. You finally found it." Margaret Rhodes, Delaney's formidable mother, initially icy and profoundly skeptical. "Mr. Grant, my daughter has already suffered more than any woman should have to bear. I trust this current venture isn't another egregious misjudgment on her part." Had slowly, almost imperceptibly warmed, seeing the genuine, unfeigned peace and quiet joy Sawyer brought to Delaney and her beloved granddaughters. She even offered a rare, almost shy, approving nod during the simple, heartfelt vows. News of Thorne's arrest, conviction, and hefty sentence, along with the public reopening of the investigation into Asher's unit, with specific official mention of Sawyer's decade-old, now fully vindicated reports, had subtly but profoundly shifted the town's collective view of him. His honor, so long tarnished and unjustly questioned, was quietly, definitively restored. Winter came late that year, ushered in by a gentle, forgiving snowfall. But the Millstone Elementary School Christmas play went on as scheduled. Sawyer sat in the front row, a nervous tremor in his hands. With June on one side, her light-up LED reindeer antlers blinking merrily, and Delaney on the other, her hand resting gently on his arm. Willa resplendent as the snowflake queen in a cloud of white tulle and glitter, and Maisie, the steadfast, silver-clad moon, searched anxiously for his face in the crowded, dim auditorium. When they found it, their smiles were sudden radiant and absolutely blinding. Delaney slipped her hand into his, her fingers lacing through his. After the play, as they were leaving, Willa shyly pressed a small, clumsily wrapped package into Sawyer's hand. "This is for Firehands," she whispered, her eyes shining. Later he opened it to find a small, lopsided clay figure painted bright blue, clearly meant to be him holding two smaller figures. A lump formed in his throat. Later that night on their own porch, the one that had once seemed so bleak and lonely to Sawyer, with fresh snow falling like a gentle, silent pardon from the heavens, Delaney pulled out a small folded note she'd tucked into his pocket earlier. He opened it. "You saved me too, Sawyer," she had written in her elegant script. Her eyes, when he looked up, were brimming. She held the note and his hand to her chest. "You once said some things break," she whispered, her voice soft against the hush of the falling snow. "But maybe what we're building now, Sawyer, what we have now, comes from the pieces that survived. The strongest pieces. The truest pieces." In the end, there was no grand parade, no mayoral speeches. Just the quiet, profound miracle of a man who stayed when everyone else had expected him to run, a woman who found the courage to heal and trust again. And two little girls who fiercely believed in a hero called Firehands, in the magic of second chances, and in the enduring power of love. They never needed perfect. They just needed each other. And that in the small, once battered town of Millstone, Vermont, under a wide, silent sky full of forgiving, watchful stars, made all the difference in the world.